it rarely feels like a decision. That's the strange part. You don't sit down and consciously say, I'm going to ignore this. You just don't open the app. You don't check the balance. You tell yourself you'll figure it out later, when you have more time, more energy, a clearer head. And in the moment, it feels harmless, even reasonable. You've already had a long day. There are other things on your mind. Maybe you don't want to deal with that slight tension in your chest that shows up when you look at the numbers, so you postpone it, just for now. But just for now has a way of repeating itself. And over time, what started as a small delay turns into a pattern. Not because you're irresponsible, but because avoidance feels easier than uncertainty. We tend to think financial problems come from bad decisions, spending too much, taking on unnecessary debt, making risky choices, and sometimes that's true. But just as often, problems come from decisions that were never made at all. The conversations you didn't have, the accounts you didn't review, the plans you didn't set. Not action, but inaction. And inaction has a very quiet way of shaping your life. Because when you avoid a money decision, nothing immediately breaks. There's no instant consequence, no clear signal that something went wrong. In fact, everything continues as normal. Bills get paid, life moves forward, you adapt, and that's what makes it so deceptive. It feels like nothing is happening, when something actually is. Think about something simple, not checking your spending for a few days. That doesn't feel like a big deal. Then it turns into a few weeks, then a month. At some point, looking at it feels heavier than it should. Because now it's not just about awareness. It's about catching up. And catching up carries pressure. So you delay it again. This is how avoidance compounds. Not financially at first, but emotionally. The longer something is avoided, the more weight it carries. And the more weight it carries, the harder it becomes to face. Over time, this starts affecting your decisions in subtle ways. You become less certain, less clear about where you stand. And when clarity disappears, confidence usually follows. So instead of making proactive decisions, you start reacting. You adjust in the moment. You deal with things as they come. But you're no longer steering. You're just responding. This is where the long-term impact begins to show. Not in one big moment, but in the accumulation of missed opportunities. Money that could have been saved but wasn't. Decisions that could have been made earlier but were delayed. Options that could have been available but quietly disappeared. Not because you chose against them, but because you never fully engaged with them. There's also something deeper happening beneath all of this. Avoidance changes your relationship with money. It turns it into something slightly uncomfortable, something you deal with when you have to, rather than something you understand. And when that relationship becomes distant, everything feels harder. You might start overestimating problems, or underestimating them. You might assume things are worse than they are, or better than they are. But either way, you're operating without clarity. And clarity is what makes decisions feel manageable. The difficult part is that avoidance often comes from a very human place. It's not laziness, it's protection. You're avoiding a feeling, stress, uncertainty, maybe even guilt. And in the short term, it works. You feel lighter, less burdened. But in the long term, that same feeling grows. Because it was never addressed, just postponed. This is the turning point most people don't realize they're in. When avoiding a small discomfort today creates a larger one tomorrow. And slowly, the cost of avoidance becomes higher than the discomfort of facing things. But here's where something can shift. Not through a big, dramatic change, but through a small reframe. Instead of seeing money decisions as something heavy, you start seeing them as something clarifying. Because most of the fear around money comes from the unknown, not the numbers themselves, but what they might reveal. And once you actually look, that uncertainty starts to shrink. Even if the situation isn't perfect, it becomes defined. And defined problems are easier to work with. There's a kind of quiet relief that comes from facing things directly, not because everything is fixed, but because nothing is hidden. You know where you stand. And that alone changes how you think. In practical terms, this doesn't mean becoming perfect or hyper-disciplined. It means reducing the gap between awareness and action, checking in regularly, even when you don't feel like it, making small decisions sooner instead of delaying them, letting things be simple instead of building them up in your mind. You don't need to solve everything at once. You don't need to solve everything at once. You just need to stop letting things sit for too long, because time doesn't pause when you avoid a decision. It keeps moving, and whatever you're avoiding moves with it. There's also something important about momentum. When you face one small thing, it becomes easier to face the next. Not because it's easier, but because you've already broken the pattern. You've proven to yourself that you can handle it. And slowly, your relationship with money becomes more stable, less reactive, less emotional, more grounded in reality. Because the truth is, most financial situations aren't as overwhelming as they feel. They just become overwhelming when they're left unattended. So if you've been avoiding certain decisions, you're not alone. That instinct is natural, but it's also something you can gently move away from. Not by forcing yourself into extremes, but by taking small steps toward clarity, looking a little sooner, deciding a little earlier, facing things while they're still manageable. Because in the long run, it's not the big mistakes that usually create the most pressure. It's the small decisions that were delayed for too long. And once you start addressing those, even quietly, something begins to shift. You feel a little more in control, a little less uncertain, a little more capable of handling what's in front of you. You don't need perfect timing. You don't need perfect knowledge. You just need to be willing to engage. Because the cost of avoiding money decisions isn't always obvious. It doesn't show up all at once. It builds slowly, in the background. But so does clarity. So does confidence. So does progress. And the moment you start facing things, even in small ways, you begin moving in a different direction. Not dramatically, not instantly, but steadily. And that's usually all it takes.